Life was supposed to be simple. A steady job, a loving wife, two amazing daughters. That was my version of the American dream. I am Jake, and for 15 years, I believed I had everything figured out. My wife, Linda, and I live in the suburbs of Denver with our girls, Sarah and Lizzie, ages 13 and 11. We have a cozy home, the kind where neighbors wave at each other and kids play in the yard. I work in logistics, not glamorous but stable, while Linda decided to stay home with the kids after we married. Everything seemed fine for a long time. The house always buzzed with the sounds of laughter, filled with the smell of Linda's home-cooked meals. We'd have friends over, go to the girls' soccer games, and spend weekends in the backyard grilling burgers while the girls chased each other around. Linda loved working on her garden, and there was something peaceful about how everything always bloomed under her touch. It felt like our lives were in perfect rhythm. But a few months ago, things started to change. Looking back, I can now see the signs, the little cracks in our perfect life that I chose to ignore. At first, Linda just seemed off. She became distant, like her mind was somewhere else, even when she was sitting right beside me. I told myself it was just stress, maybe from raising two teenagers. I figured we'd get through it like we always did. But then, there were other things. Subtle, at first, like how she suddenly started paying more attention to her appearance. Linda had always been pretty casual, but now she was dressing up, wearing makeup, perfume, even when she was just running errands. At night, she'd get these mysterious texts, always with a smile, quickly putting her phone down when I walked into the room. Intimacy between us dwindled until it practically disappeared. Conversations were short, barely more than a few words exchanged during dinner. I told myself it was a phase, that it would pass. Then came the night that changed everything. Linda had been vague about her plans, mentioning she was going out with some friends, but something about her seemed different. She was dressed up more than usual, and when I asked who she was meeting, she was evasive, giving me non-answers that gnawed at my gut. As she left the house, a feeling of dread settled over me, the kind you try to shake off but can't. I wanted to believe everything was fine, that I was just being paranoid. Our daughters, Sarah and Lizzie, noticed the changes too. They asked me why Mom seemed so distracted, why she was always on her phone, or out late. I had no answers for them. I was struggling to come up with reasons for myself. Still, I convinced myself that this was just a rough patch, that we'd pull through it. Then, the little things started adding up. Linda received late-night phone calls, whispered conversations she would cut off when I entered the room. And then there was her sudden obsession with spa days and girl nights out. Something wasn't adding up. One Saturday, when Linda left for one of her supposed spa days, something inside me snapped. I could not sit in the house, waiting for her to come back with more lies. So, I did something I had never done before. I grabbed her phone and started scrolling through her messages. That is when I found him. His name was Chris. The messages between them were playful, full of inside jokes and comments that made my stomach twist. One, in particular, froze me where I stood. Last night was amazing. Can't wait to see you again tonight. It felt like the world shifted beneath me. My wife, the mother of my kids, had been lying to me for God knows how long. The discovery of those messages shattered me. My heart pounded in my chest, my hands trembling as I held her phone. How had I missed this? How had it come to this? I replayed moments from the last few months, trying to pinpoint exactly when my wife had started slipping away from me. Was it my fault? Had I been too focused on work, too blind to her needs? I wanted to confront her right then and there, call her out on her betrayal, but I hesitated. A single message could be explained away, a misunderstanding or a bad joke. No, I needed more proof. As much as I hated it, I had to be sure. So I swallowed my anger and decided to wait. I had to play it smart. The next few weeks were hell. Every time Linda left the house, every phone call, every text she received, it felt like another dagger twisting in my chest. I started paying closer attention to her habits, where she went, how long she was gone. I took mental notes, piecing together a pattern. She was leaving more often, always with some excuse. Meeting friends, running errands, taking a break from the kids. And each time, she came back with the same aloofness, like she had completely checked out from our life. Our home, once filled with warmth and laughter, now felt cold and empty. Even the girls noticed. They kept asking why Mom was so distant, why she spent so much time on her phone, why she was never around. I hated lying to them, but I was not ready to tell them the truth. They were too young to have their image of their mother destroyed. One Friday evening, she told me she was heading to her friend Becky's place for the night, like she had done so many times before. But this time, I had a different plan. I waited for her to leave, counted the minutes, then grabbed my keys and slipped out of the house. I had been tracking her long enough to know her real destination was nowhere near Becky's. I followed her, staying a few cars behind, my hands gripping the wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. My mind raced with what I would do when I got there. Part of me hoped I was wrong, that this was all just some terrible misunderstanding. But deep down, I knew the truth. Linda was not going to Becky's. As we drove, she turned away from the familiar neighborhood and headed towards a quieter part of town. I trailed her at a safe distance, my heart pounding in my ears. She pulled into the driveway of a small, nondescript house. I parked a few blocks away and watched as she got out of the car, checking over her shoulder as she headed inside. I felt sick to my stomach. I knew who lived there. Chris. It was like a punch to the gut. The name I had seen in her texts, the man who had somehow wormed his way into her life and my marriage. I got out of my car and slowly made my way toward the house, sticking to the shadows. I had to see it with my own eyes, had to confirm what I already knew deep down. As I crept closer, I could see them through the front window. Linda was laughing, her head thrown back, the way she used to laugh with me. Chris stood beside her, his arm draped around her waist, way too comfortable, way too intimate. My blood boiled as I watched them, their bodies close, their laughter shared. I had seen enough. I wanted to storm in, confront them right then and there, but I stopped myself. No, I needed proof, something undeniable. So I did the only thing I could think of. I pulled out my phone and started recording. Standing there in the dark, watching my wife share a moment with another man, was like something out of a nightmare. My heart was racing, my mind spiraling. I wanted to look away, to pretend that none of this was real, but I could not. I recorded everything, their laughter, the way Chris casually touched her, how she leaned into him like they had been together for years. When they moved deeper into the house, out of sight from the window, I had a terrible feeling of what would happen next. I needed more than just them laughing together. I needed undeniable proof. My legs felt like lead as I moved around the side of the house, hoping for a better view. I found another window, a narrow gap through which I could see them entering the bedroom. My stomach churned as I watched Linda and Chris undress. The sight of my wife, my partner of 15 years, removing her clothes for another man. It was too much, but I forced myself to keep watching, to keep filming. My hands were shaking as I pressed record, capturing every painful second. I felt like I was outside my own body, like this was happening to someone else. There they were, tangled in each other's arms, naked, moving together in a way that was unmistakable. I could hear their laughter, muffled by the glass, but the meaning was clear. They were enjoying each other, fully lost in their world, while I stood just feet away, hidden in the shadows of the life we had built together. I turned off the recording, my whole body shaking with rage. There it was, the undeniable proof. There was no coming back from this. Linda had crossed a line that I could never forgive, a betrayal so deep that it cut through everything we had shared. I stood there for a long time, staring at the house, feeling my anger bubbling up, threatening to explode. I wanted to smash the window, scream at them, drag Chris out of the house, and make him pay for what he had done. But what good would that do? It wouldn't change the fact that the woman I loved had chosen him over me. With one last look at the house, I turned and walked back to my car, my heart pounding. I had the evidence I needed. I knew exactly what I was dealing with now. But as I drove home, my mind was a storm of emotions. Anger, betrayal, disbelief. How long had this been going on? How had I missed it? When I got home, the house was quiet. The girls were asleep, and the silence felt suffocating. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the footage on my phone. I watched it again, feeling my heart break all over, the weight of her betrayal pressing down on me. I kept asking myself the same question. Why? Why had she done this to us? Linda came home later that night, much later than she had promised. She slipped into bed quietly, thinking I was asleep, but I was wide awake, my body tense with anger. I waited a few minutes, trying to calm myself, but I could not. The proof was on my phone, and the truth was out in the open. I couldn't hold it in any longer. I turned on the bedside lamp, and she jumped, startled by the sudden light. Her eyes were wide, and she looked at me like a deer caught in headlights. "Jake, what are you doing up?" she asked, her voice shaky. I sat up slowly, the phone clutched in my hand. "We need to talk," I said, my voice cold, almost foreign to my own ears. She hesitated, sitting up cautiously. "About what?" I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of what I was about to say. "About you and Chris." Her face drained of color. I could see the panic in her eyes as the truth she had been hiding finally caught up to her. The silence that followed my words was like a weight pressing down on both of us. Linda's face turned pale, her mouth opening and closing as if she was trying to come up with something, anything, to explain her way out of this. But there was no escaping the truth this time. "Jake, I can explain," she stammered, her voice trembling as she avoided my eyes. I shook my head. "Do not even try, Linda. I know everything." Her eyes finally met mine, and I saw the panic there, mixed with guilt. She started to speak again, but I cut her off. I unlocked my phone, scrolled to the video, and played it. The room was filled with the sounds of her and Chris, their laughter, their intimate moments. I watched as Linda's face crumpled, her hands going up to her mouth in shock. "Jake, please. I am so sorry," she whispered, tears starting to pool in her eyes. "Sorry," I said, my voice low and steady, though every part of me was shaking. "Sorry for what? For getting caught? For destroying our family?" She reached for me, but I pulled away, standing up from the bed, unable to be near her. The anger coursing through me was like a fire I could barely contain. "How long, Linda? How long have you been screwing him behind my back?" She sobbed, covering her face with her hands. It started a few months ago. I did not mean for it to happen, I swear. Do not lie to me." I snapped, my voice louder than I intended. "I read the messages. I saw everything. This has been going on for months. You've been living a lie, and What about me, Linda? What about our girls? Did you even think about them? About what this would do to them?" Her sobs grew louder, and she tried to speak between her tears. "I was lonely, Jake. You were always working, always distracted, and Chris, he made me feel special again, like I mattered." I could not believe what I was hearing. "So this is my fault now? I work hard to provide for you and the girls, and this is how you repay me? By running off with some guy behind my back?" "No," she cried, shaking her head frantically. "No, it is not your fault. It is mine. I know that. I made a horrible mistake. But please, Jake, do not throw away everything we have because of this. We can fix it. I know we can. I love you." Her words stung, but they felt hollow now. I wanted to believe her, wanted to believe that we could somehow piece things back together, but the damage was done. Trust, once shattered, was nearly impossible to repair. "I do not know if I can ever forgive you for this, Linda," I said, my voice breaking slightly. "You have betrayed me in the worst way possible." She sobbed harder, collapsing onto the bed as if the weight of my words was crushing her. "Please, Jake, I will do anything. Counseling, whatever it takes. Just give me one more chance." I could not bear to look at her anymore. The woman I had loved for 15 years, the mother of my children, had become a stranger to me. I needed space, time to think. I could not make any decisions tonight, not with my heart in pieces and my mind swirling with anger and betrayal. "I need time, Linda. I need time to figure out what comes next. But right now, I cannot be here. I cannot be around you." Her sobs were the only sound in the room as I grabbed my jacket and headed for the door. "Jake, please," she called out one last time, but I did not stop. I closed the door behind me, walking out into the cold night, unsure if I would ever walk back into that house again. As I drove away from our house, My mind was in turmoil. The quiet streets of the suburbs passed by in a blur, but I could not focus on anything. I had no idea where I was heading, only that I needed to get away from her, away from everything that reminded me of the life we had built together, the life she had torn apart with her lies. I found myself pulling into the driveway of my best friend, Tom. We had known each other since college, and he was the only person I could think to turn to. I walked up to his front door and knocked, my hands still shaking from everything that had happened. Tom opened the door, immediately noticing the look on my face. "Jake? What the hell is going on, man?" I could barely get the words out. "Linda. She's been cheating on me." Tom's face hardened, and he stepped aside to let me in. We sat in his living room, and I told him everything, about the messages, about Chris, about the video. He listened silently, letting me vent, his expression growing darker with every detail. "Jesus, Jake," he finally said, shaking his head. "That is, I do not even know what to say. You want me to go over there and handle this guy?" "Because I will." I laughed bitterly. "That will not solve anything, Tom. I do not even know what to do right now. Part of me wants to burn it all down, get revenge, make them both pay. But what good would that do? It will not undo what she did." Tom leaned back, crossing his arms. "Look, man, you need to take a minute. Do not make any rash decisions. You have to think about the girls, too." His words hit me like a ton of bricks. The girls. Sarah and Lizzie. I had been so consumed with my own anger and betrayal that I had almost forgotten the two people who would be most affected by all of this. How would I explain it to them? How could I tell them that their mom had destroyed everything? I sighed, rubbing my face with both hands. "I know, I do not know if I can ever trust her again. Do you want to try?" Tom asked. "Or is it already over?" I thought about that question for a long time, staring out the window at the dark, empty street. Could I forgive her? Could we ever go back to the way things were? Or had too much been broken? "I do not know, man," I finally said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I really do not know." I knew I should have walked away after confronting Linda, but the anger was too much. I was beyond reason. I needed her to understand the pain she caused me, the humiliation. Revenge was the only thing on my mind. "I want to hurt her where it really counts," I said to Tom, my voice hard, colder than I'd ever heard it. "Her reputation, her social life. And Chris? I want him to feel it too." Tom hesitated but nodded. "I get it, Jake. But you have to be careful. This can backfire." Still, he agreed to help me. We sat down and started plotting. I gathered all the evidence I had, messages, videos, everything, and prepared to make sure it found its way to the right people. I wanted the world to know exactly what Linda had done, who she had become. The first step was sending anonymous emails to her closest friends. I attached some of the most incriminating screenshots, her messages with Chris, the ones where she flirted, where they talked about their secret meetings. It was a cruel move, but at that point, I wanted them to see the real Linda, the one who had lied to me and to everyone around her. But that wasn't enough. I created a social media account under a fake name and uploaded the videos. Yes, the videos of her and Chris together, captured from outside his house. I sent the link directly to Chris's boss. I knew it would ruin his reputation. I wanted him to feel the consequences just as much as she would. As I executed my plan, a twisted sense of satisfaction filled me, but it didn't last. I also felt something deeper, a pang of guilt, like I was losing a part of myself in the process. This wasn't who I used to be. Yet, the anger and betrayal were still fresh, still too raw. The fallout came fast and hit hard. Linda's friends began calling her, confronting her about the messages. I could hear her crying through the phone in the other room, her voice breaking as she tried to justify her actions. But it was no use. The whispers in our community grew louder, and I knew it was only a matter of time before the full extent of her betrayal was exposed to everyone. Chris fared even worse. His boss called him in for a meeting, and he was promptly fired. Knowing that he was paying for his part in this mess gave me a grim sense of satisfaction. I had hoped for this outcome, and now it was playing out exactly as I had imagined. But then, the confrontation came. A few days after I sent everything out, Linda finally confronted me. Her face was pale, her eyes swollen and red from crying. She stood in the doorway, barely able to look at me. "Jake," she started, her voice shaking with both anger and desperation. "What have you done?" I leaned back in my chair, arms crossed, feeling no remorse. "I made sure everyone knows the truth, Linda." She blinked, stunned by my coldness. "How could you?" she sobbed, stepping forward. "I know I hurt you, but this is too much. You've destroyed my life." "Too much," I shouted, my voice booming through the house. "You betrayed me, Linda. You lied to me and the kids for over a year. Did you think there wouldn't be consequences?" Her knees buckled, and she collapsed onto the floor, sobbing uncontrollably. I had never seen her like this, broken, helpless. For a brief moment, something inside me twisted, but I pushed it away. She had caused this. She was the one who destroyed our family. "I'm sorry, Jake. I'm so sorry," she cried, her hands reaching toward me as if begging for forgiveness. "I'll do anything to make this right." I turned my back to her, staring out the window into the backyard where the girls used to play. "It's too late for that," I said, my voice hard. "You need to face the reality of what you've done." Linda's life was in ruins. Her friends had all but abandoned her. The whispers in our community grew louder with every passing day, and she was constantly trying to explain herself to people who no longer wanted to listen. Chris, on the other hand, lost his job and faced public humiliation. They were both paying for their betrayal. But as I stood there, looking at the woman who had been my partner for 15 years, something began to stir inside me. Revenge had felt good at first, but now, it left me hollow. The satisfaction I thought I'd feel wasn't there. Instead, it was replaced by a strange, sinking emptiness. As Linda's sobs filled the room, I realized something. Destroying her life didn't fix mine. The anger was still burning, the betrayal still cut deep, and nothing I had done had changed that. The damage was done, but not just to her or Chris. It was inside me, too. Without another word, I grabbed my keys and left the house. I needed air, space, anything to get away from the mess I had created, the life I had shattered. I drove aimlessly, trying to make sense of it all. The satisfaction I had craved turned into a burden I wasn't ready to carry. The revenge had been achieved, but at what cost? The weeks that followed my act of revenge were a blur of conflicting emotions. I should have felt victorious, maybe even liberated. Instead, I was left with a weight on my chest, something heavy and dark that I couldn't shake. Linda's life had crumbled before her eyes, and Chris had lost his job, his reputation, and everything that came with it. But despite the chaos I had caused, the gnawing feeling of emptiness only grew. It was time to think about the future, to figure out what came next for me, and more importantly, for the girls. Divorce. That was the next logical step, and I knew it had to happen, but the thought of it filled me with dread. I made an appointment with a divorce lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Mara Davis. Sitting in her office, I laid out the situation, carefully going through all the evidence I had gathered. The videos, the messages, it was all there. Mara listened intently, scribbling notes as I talked, her expression unreadable. "You have a very strong case for divorce on the grounds of adultery," Mara said after I finished. Her tone was professional, matter of fact. "Given the evidence, we'll push for joint custody of your daughters. Considering the circumstances, I think we can negotiate a fair division of assets." Her words were reassuring, but the reality of what I was doing hit me hard. This was it. The process had started, and there was no going back now. That evening, after the girls had gone to bed, I found Linda sitting in the living room, staring blankly at the TV. She looked up when I entered, her eyes weary and swollen from days of crying. We hadn't spoken much since I had unleashed my revenge, and the tension between us was suffocating. "Jake," she started softly, her voice filled with desperation. "Please, can we talk?" I sat down across from her, trying to keep my emotions in check. "We do need to talk," I said, my tone flat, "but not in the way you're hoping. I met with a lawyer today, Linda. I'm filing for divorce." Her face crumpled, and the tears came instantly. "No, Jake, please, do not do this. I know I hurt you, but we can work through this. We can fix this. For the girls, if nothing else. I shook my head, my resolve firm. The girls deserve better than this. Better than to grow up in a house filled with lies and betrayal. We can't go back to what we had, Linda. You destroyed that. She reached for my hand, desperation in her eyes. I'll do anything, Jake. I'll go to counseling. I'll never speak to Chris again. Just, please, do not end this. I pulled my hand away, the distance between us more than just physical. I can't trust you anymore, I said, my voice hollow. Every time I look at you, all I see is your betrayal. This isn't just about us. It's about the girls. They deserve a stable, honest home, even if that means we aren't together. Her sobs filled the room again, and for a fleeting moment, I felt my resolve waver. But I knew this was the right decision. There was no way to rebuild the trust that had been shattered. I'm moving out tomorrow, I continued, my voice steady. I'll find a place nearby so I can be close to the girls. We'll work out a custody arrangement that's best for them. Linda nodded through her tears, her shoulders slumping in defeat. I understand, she whispered, barely audible. I'll do whatever it takes to make this as easy as possible for them. The next day, I packed my things and moved into a small apartment a few miles away. It wasn't much, but it was a fresh start, and that was what I needed. The girls would be staying with me part-time, and I wanted the apartment to feel like home for them, somewhere they could feel safe and loved despite the upheaval. The legal process was long and grueling, but Mara fought hard for me. We worked out a custody arrangement that gave me significant time with Sarah and Lizzie, and the division of assets was fair. Linda didn't fight me on any of it, perhaps realizing she was in no position to demand anything. The first night the girls stayed with me was bittersweet. They were confused, sad about the changes, and I did my best to reassure them that no matter what, both of their parents loved them. We spent the evening playing games, watching movies, and trying to create new memories in this new chapter of our lives. But the hole that had been ripped in our family still lingered, and I knew it would take time to heal. As the weeks passed, life started to settle into a strange new rhythm. My apartment, once a symbol of everything that had fallen apart, slowly began to feel like home. It took time, adjusting to the silence, the nights when Sarah and Lizzie weren't with me, but it was necessary. The girls were adapting better than I had hoped, though they were still confused by everything that had happened. I did my best to create stability for them, to show them that no matter what, they would always have me. Linda and I kept our interactions brief. She was civil, even helpful when it came to organizing the girls' schedules, but the pain was always there, lurking beneath the surface. Every time I saw her, I felt that familiar anger flare up, the betrayal she had inflicted still fresh in my mind. She was trying, though. I could see it. She wasn't the same person she had been before, and maybe that was what hurt the most. One night, about a month after I moved out, Linda called. There was a brokenness in her voice I had not heard before. "Jake, can we meet?" she asked softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I need to talk to you." I hesitated. I didn't want to get sucked back into her mess, but there was something in the way she asked. It sounded like she was hanging on by a thread. Reluctantly, I agreed. We met at a nearby coffee shop, a place we used to go to back when things were still good between us. As soon as I walked in, I could see how much she had changed. She looked tired, worn down by the weight of everything that had happened. Her eyes, once filled with life, were hollow now, clouded with regret. "Jake," she began, her voice trembling slightly. "I know I've hurt you more than I can ever make up for. I've lost everything, my friends, my reputation, and most importantly, I've lost you and the girls. I just want you to know that I'm truly sorry." Her words hit me, but they didn't stir the anger I had once felt. Instead, there was something else, pity, maybe, or understanding. "I appreciate that, Linda," I said, my tone calm but detached. "But sorry doesn't change what happened. We need to move forward, for the girls' sake." She nodded, tears brimming in her eyes again. "I know. I just wanted to acknowledge it, how much I've destroyed. I hope one day you can forgive me." "I hope so too," I said, and I meant it. But forgiveness wasn't something I could just offer. It would take time, maybe more time than either of us realized. As I walked back to my car that night, I felt something I hadn't felt in months, a sense of closure. The chapter with Linda was ending, and while the pain would always be there, it was starting to fade, replaced by something else, peace. The months that followed were about rebuilding, finding out who I was outside of my marriage. I threw myself into my work, keeping busy to fill the empty hours. I reconnected with old friends, joined a gym, and even took up photography again, a hobby I had long neglected. The days blurred together, but slowly, I felt pieces of myself returning, parts of me that had been buried under the weight of a failing marriage. And then, one evening, something unexpected happened. Tom invited me to a gallery opening. It was a small event, and honestly, I wasn't that interested, but I went anyway. I figured it was better than sitting alone in my apartment. The night was uneventful until I met someone. Her name was Emily. She was an art teacher, kind and warm, with a smile that made everything seem a little bit lighter. We started talking, just casual at first, but there was something about her. She wasn't pushy or prying. She was patient, understanding. She knew about my recent divorce, and she didn't ask too many questions. She just listened. We went on a few dates, simple ones, dinner, walks in the park, nothing extravagant, but meaningful. There was no pressure, no expectations. It felt natural, easy. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I could breathe again. As our relationship grew, I introduced Emily to Sarah and Lizzie. I was nervous, unsure of how they would react, but they took to her immediately. Seeing them laugh together, seeing them bond with her, it filled me with a joy I hadn't felt in years. Emily wasn't trying to replace Linda. She was simply adding something new and beautiful to our lives. It had been a few weeks since Linda confessed her remorse and asked for forgiveness. Her life was destroyed, just as I had planned. Chris had lost his job and could no longer hold his head high among people. But I still did not feel satisfied. That silence, the lack of true relief, it was driving me mad. When my daughters were around, I wore a smile, played the role of the caring father. But every evening, when the apartment sank into silence, dark thoughts crept in. Everything I had done did not seem enough. I saw Linda suffer, but it was not enough. Chris was broken, but it felt like it was not enough for him either. I could not shake the feeling that I could have done more. I thought about striking even deeper. I had access to their personal data. I could ruin their credit histories, meddle in their lives even further. I could make sure Linda would never find work again, destroy the remaining pieces of her life. But that was not enough. There were other thoughts. Cruel, frightening thoughts. I thought about killing Chris. One night, I even imagined how it could happen. I would ambush him somewhere when he was alone. It could look like an accident. No one would even realize it was an act of revenge. These were thoughts I would never admit to in the daylight, but they kept creeping into my mind, over and over again. It was in those moments that I realized I was standing on the edge of an abyss. I looked in the mirror and no longer saw myself. I saw a man consumed by rage. I did not recognize who I had become. Revenge had not only destroyed their lives, but also mine. What had I become? Who was I, contemplating killing a man who had once been just an annoyance in my life? One night, as these dark thoughts began to consume me again, I woke up in a cold sweat. My heart was pounding in my chest. This could not go on. If I took another step, I would lose everything. Not them, myself, my humanity, my ability to be a father, to be a person. I realized that if I did not stop, I would become someone worse than them. My revenge had already turned me into a monster. The next day, I stepped outside, breathed in the cold air deeply, and made a decision. I would leave things as they were. I would not seek any more revenge on Linda and Chris. Let them live with their ruined lives, with their shame and guilt. I chose a different path for myself. My life, with Emily, with my daughters, that was what I needed to focus on. I would no longer be a prisoner of my own anger. Let the darkness stay in the past. And so, I let them go. And finally, I freed myself.